So 3, 2, 1. Is that actually recording?
It doesn't seem to be.
Greetings and welcome to the Saroth Mage Experiment. Tonight I have with me the wonderful Sarah Mastros. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming on the show. I've been given you've given me a little bit of your Orphic grimoire book, the incense book that you're working on. But Can you just tell me, like, how you got into magic in the first place? Was it?
Oh
like,
gosh. Well, I got into magic super young. Like I got into magic basically from fairy tales as a little kid, and then when I was 8, I like saw a catalog. Like books were not that widely available. Especially I lived like out in the country, and this story is set in like the mid 80s, right?
Yeah.
Early 80s, really, mid to early 80s. But I got a book catalog from like a new agey bookstore. And one of the topics in it was witchcraft, and it was under nonfiction. And I was like, that means it is real.
Yeah.
And I ordered 2 books, one of which was, I feel bad that I don't even remember the name of this book. I call it Buckland's Big Blue Book of Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. I think it might be called like the Complete Book of Witchcraft or something, which was fine. I learned a lot of things from it.
Was
It was
that like the
work.
Llewellyn title?
Yeah, probably. If I had to make a guess, I would imagine it is a Llewellyn title. It's Llewellyn-ish.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a wiser title, though. I'm not 100% positive. And that was really like a very sort of solid introduction to sort of like 80s Wicca, 80s like pop Wicca, right? And it was fine, but it didn't feel like, it didn't have that sort of like fairy tale reality. Like it felt kind of made up, which was fine. I did learn a lot of good things from that book. But I also got a book called The Encyclopedia of White Witchcraft by Patty Slade, which in truth had less useful information in it, but had more of like the feeling I wanted. Like it really seemed like she did magic that like she learned from her grandmother, and also like she did magic with her neighbors, like in concert with the land where they lived. And that was sort of more appealing to me aesthetically. And then I just slowly put those together and kept researching. The most important thing I feel like I learned early was, one, like magic is real. You can be a witch, but it's hard. You have to like work at it. And 2, that like magic is like hidden in history and fairy tales, but if you read between the lines, you can find it. And I like that kind of nerdy research, so it was really on from there. And then I just kept going. In terms of like formal magic, I sort of wandered around for a while, and then I found Solomonic magic, and that's really where I sort of cut my teeth as a like sort of serious, like practical magic, get big results in the world kind of magician. And these days, I guess I would say that I focus on like broadly, I don't like to be pigeonholed, truthfully. I'm kind of commitment averse, but in as much as I have a specialty, I would say it's probably like the sorcery, like Pan-Levantine, so like the Eastern Mediterranean Pan-Levantine sorcery from like late antiquity.
Yeah, your heritage is like half Jewish, half Greek. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'm Greek. I'm Jewish on my mother's side, and like culturally Greek on my father's side. Genetically, there's a little bit of other stuff in there, but like so technically I am also like a little bit Irish and a little bit Scottish, but like I do not participate in those cultures in any way, really. Like I didn't, like that part of my family is adopted. Like I don't, like I grew up Jewish and Greek in a like, those were cultures I was enmeshed in. And weirdly, I also like grew up, though I have no heritage there, like enmeshed in Pennsylvania Dutch culture. Like I grew up in Pennsylvania Dutch country, so I speak a little bit of Dutch, and like I know some powwow and braucherei, things like that.
Cool. So witchcraft, I don't, I'm not a professional magician myself. I'm a bit of a dabbler. What are the differences between the very hermetic kind of Kabbalah, Golden Dawn, Thelema sort of systems to the more witchcrafty? What makes it witchcraft as opposed to one of those systems?
Also for me, like, first of all, like I generally use the word witch to define myself as opposed to like magician or occultist or sorceress, although I am also all of those other things. Like I choose witch for like straight up political reasons. Like I feel like witch highlights one, like I will say for me, my avoidance of the use word witch when I was young, and I was like, oh, I'm not a witch, I'm a magician, was 100% fueled by internalized misogyny. Like I'm not saying other people are doing that, but for me, like the singular reason I defined myself as a magician and not a witch is because like I didn't want to be seen as practicing like shitty girl magic. But that's bullshit. And like I use the word witch so other little girls don't have to do that. Like that's for me, like why I use the word. Broadly, I think there is sort of a continuum between I don't want to turn this into like a long, complex answer, but the short version is like I think at one end we have things that like historically and traditionally in Europe are sometimes referred to as high magic and things that are sometimes referred to as low magic. I think the biggest difference between those is that high magic requires literacy and is usually done either by yourself or by yourself and a very few number of people for sort of like broadly your own personal benefit, right? And at the other end, right, we have magic being practiced primarily as an oral culture, right? It's handed down among families, among communities, and it is almost always practiced sort of in a community setting. So even if one person is doing the magic, there is this expectation that you are doing it sort of with a circle of bystanders. It tends to focus a little bit more on like community things, so like politics, like overt politics, like keeping the landlord off your back, right? Keeping the God bless and keep the czar far away from me kind of magic. A lot of healing, those sort of things. But I think that in a culture like we live in of basically ubiquitous literacy, I think that distinction is like honestly not very important.
Yeah.
Like I think primarily the biggest difference between those two magics is that for one of them you need to be rich and be able to read, and in the other one you need to have other people. And I advocate people being able to read and having human co-magicians, best of both worlds.
Yeah, you seem like a kind of community person to me. And
I mean, it's been hard this year. So this year, honestly, I've done less like group magic than I've probably ever done in my whole life. So this past Saturday, my coven did our first like in-person, everybody in the same room, like circle in basically a full year. We did on Saturday.
I bet it was
Now
powerful.
that like people are vaccinated. Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. Like I loved it. Honestly, I think some people like forgot how intense it was. So I think it was actually like a little overwhelming for a couple people. Because I think all of us were like, oh, like let's go hard. But maybe we went a little too hard for some people. But also I'm injured right now, like just physically injured. So like I was maybe not at the top of my game.
So what kind of things do you do with your coven? Are you going for results? You know, like let's try and achieve this for the community, or let's help this person with this. You know, what? How does I've never been in a coven. I've never worked magic with anyone else.
We do a lot of different things. Usually our coven rituals have like, we're all working on sort of the same theme. And there's usually like one goal that we all share, right? So in a recent ritual, it involved the muses, and like what we all wanted was like individual inspiration for different projects, but then everybody had their own goals too. And I will say in that one, my personal goal was actually physical healing. I was like, dear muses, please heal my tailbone. Like I have an issue with the joint between my tailbone and my pelvis right now. And I know you wouldn't normally go to the muses for healing, but like I had this sort of open portal. And also, you know, as you might imagine as a writer, like the muses and I have a close relationship already. Like those are spirits I work with a lot. So like I worked for healing in that one for me. And I think like some other people did as well. Like, you know, I was using a cane during that ritual. Like I'm still a little injured, but much better.
Yeah,
like I improved dramatically after that ritual, and now it's just like the last little bit of like soreness basically.
I read your Facebook posts, and I was a little bit worried about you when you were describing your health problems at the moment, but
I didn't, it just, you know, for the first like week I didn't actually know what the injury was, and that's always scary to have pain you don't know what it is being caused by.
Yeah,
but I mean I'm much better. Like it's, you know,
good. Glad to hear.
I heal fast generally.
So another thing that's very interesting about you is you're like a witch for hire,
Mhm.
like a gunslinger, an occult gunslinger.
I think of it more as like the weird old lady on the edge of town who, does stuff more than like
So,
gunslinger, but sure.
so how does that work? How do you get clients? How do they know about you?
So really, in my own community, I don't usually charge, right? So people who are like basically if you physically show up in my living room and we're already friends, I'm probably not going to charge you in the same way that if I have a friend who's a plumber and my sink doesn't work, I do kind of expect them to just fix my
Yeah,
sink
of
for free.
course.
Like, right, there's like kind of reciprocity like inside an actual sort of communal circle, right? A
Mhm.
real community,
Yeah.
right? On the internet, right, I generally do charge,
Mm.
right? In truth, I honestly think like mostly people hear about me either like on Facebook or in these interviews or just word of mouth.
Mm.
I don't do a lot of advertising. Like when I am starting to offer a new class or something, I'll drop a couple of ads, but it's mostly just like people hear about me or I get recommended, and that's where people come from, I think.
Yeah. And what kind of things do you get asked to do? Are there ethical dimensions? Like if
There are, so lots of times I get asked to do things that I just decline to do. And I will also say that like any other kind of work, like there's no such thing as ethical employment under capitalism. So like I do occasionally take work that like I would prefer not to do, but maybe I need work that month. You know what I mean? Like since I've been injured, I did in fact need a little more work. Like some of my other work was not doable. So I picked up different kinds of work. COVID changed my like I wasn't doing festivals anymore, all kinds of things, right? And similarly, sometimes I will pass on work to other people who either have different standards or sometimes need money more than I do. Ethically, like there are certain things I won't do. I won't curse strangers for money. That's ridiculous. Like I don't mean to say it's ridiculous. Like if other people want to be in that business, fine. But like I'm not. I'm not a gunslinger. Like I don't want to do that work. I'm not gonna curse a stranger for money. Like that just seems spooky to me. Certain kinds of necromancy, I generally pretty much I will flat out refuse to put people in contact with the recently dead. Like I think you got to let them settle for a while. It's not good for people. So there's
yeah.
that sort of ethical dimension. In truth, I think like what I get asked to do is pretty much whenever I read like an ancient spell book, like say the PGM, it's very
Yes.
clear to me that like the things those witches for hire are being asked to do are pretty much the same as what I'm asked to do.
Yeah.
Like divination, right, is a big part of it, like fortune telling, curse breaking. I sort of specialize in curse breaking. Help me get a job, help me make my boss like me, help me find a new romantic partner. I don't do a lot of healing. I don't think I'm especially good at it. And some people like really specialize in that. So I usually refer that out. But it's all those kinds of things that like you would think it would be. Real estate magic, helping people find a new home is another specialty of mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's what you think it is. You know what I mean? It's the same thing that like the witch in the story in the fairy tale does. Like
Yeah. I
all of
think the
those things,
PGM shows the continuity of human needs and
Yeah,
desires.
I think like people want
Exactly the
the things
same.
they want. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I will say like, witch for hiring is actually not my favorite part of my job. I honestly prefer writing and teaching. I'm just kind of a nerdy person like that. So in truth, as I do more reading and teaching, I slowly phase out some of the witch for hire work because I just don't like it as much. Like just personally, I don't know, because I'm a prima donna. There's work I like more and work I like less, and I do as much of the work I like best as I can, and I take the work I like less when I need more cash. But I mean, let's be clear, it's not like digging ditches. It's still a pretty great job.
So, do you actually manage to make a living out of just magic and nothing else?
I mean, I don't have another job, but I will also say, like, I live like a nun. So the amount of money I bring in and the amount of money I spend is just not that much, right? Like, particularly, I don't have kids. Like, I don't think not that I couldn't. Look, my goal is really to make as little money as I need to in order to, like, not worry about money.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure I could be making more if I did more advertising or worked more. but I'd rather do like more capital W work and less lowercase w work, basically.
Yeah.
So I make enough to be a nun, which is, not a lucrative career, but it pays bills. Like, I have a house. I have as many fruit trees as a person could reasonably take care of. Like, I pay all my bills. I don't know. I'm perfectly happy.
You
But
have what you need.
yeah, right. I own 6 apple trees. Like, how much richer could a person be? That's how I feel about it. I mean, most of them are still little baby trees.
Yeah.
They're getting older,
So, what is that? Is that a wimple you're wearing?
It is, yes.
Could you?
Or, I mean, it is wimple-esque, yeah. So I am in a group. We call ourselves the Sisterhood of the Crocopeplos. It is a pagan monastic order. Despite the name, it is not exclusively for women, although in practice it is primarily women and women sort of adjacent people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but there's no like, I don't know, there's no like gender or sex criteria on membership. Anybody can join. It's a monastic order in the sense that like the goal really is to like live together in communal abbeys and to forswear the having of an external family, right? So like, to me, the sort of core principles of monasticism are like communism, like you live communally, and not having kids.
Yeah.
Like, to me, those are sort of the core features. So like, in a logistical sense, that's what we do. It's called the Sisterhood of the Crocopeplos. Many of us have many different kinds of priesthood behind us, right? But the one that we share as a sisterhood is a goddess that we call she of the Crocopeplos. Crocopeplos is a Greek word. It literally just means yellow dress, right? So like what I'm wearing, but it's commonly in ancient Greek, it's commonly used as an epithet for a variety of goddesses. So Homer, for example, uses it for a couple people, but most commonly for Eos, the dawn. And in that context, like, what does it mean for Eos to be wearing a saffron colored robe? Like, it's pretty clear. It's pretty clearly like a metaphor for her coloring the heavens, right? So croco, the Greek word there, it's the same as the English word crocus. It means saffron, right? So the color produced by saffron dye, which is the same like color of robe used by Buddhist monks. It's used all over the Mediterranean, that saffron color. Although in practice, both in the Far East and in the Near East, that color is usually produced by turmeric dye and not saffron dye. So this is dyed with turmeric and not saffron. And this is actually just, I don't know, some kind of modern synthetic dye. Like, I bought this one, it was already that color. I didn't dye it. Right. So yeah, if anybody wants to learn more about that, crocopeplos.org is the website. They can learn a lot more. In the Greek magical papyri, the epithet crocopeplos, yellow robed, saffron robed, is most commonly applied to Hecate, who is a goddess of a lot of things, but broadly I think of her as a goddess of liminality, right? In-betweenness and magic and learning. Right. And so in the order of the Crocopeplos, Sisterhood of the Crocopeplos, we think of she of the Crocopeplos, her core attributes as learning, liberation, and liminality. Yeah. Like, she's the goddess of those things.
Hecate seems to be everywhere at the moment.
It's true. Like, when I first like started, I don't know, I'm gonna sound like a goofball hipster, like, oh, back in my day. That's not how I mean it. I just mean, like, I don't know. I feel like even 10 years ago, nobody even knew who I was talking about when I said Hecate. And I agree. She's everywhere now. She is actively recruiting in the world. Like, she is extremely active right now as a like spiritual magical force, both in terms of what humans are doing. And I feel like, I don't know, however we say, in the other places, I also feel like she is very active and has become dramatically more active just in the, like, I can't say how long, but in the, maybe 30 some years I've been working with her, she's gotten much more active, even relative to other goddesses and other spirits and other things.
I don't really have much clairvoyant ability or psychic ability, but I'd started to do, is it the deep non when you leave an offering at a crossroads? I'd been doing that, and one night I came back and I just felt extreme presence over my shoulder. It was absolutely, the hairs were standing up in the back of my neck. and that was Hecate. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I think so. So I think one of the interesting things about like leaving offerings at the crossroads for Hecate is I think it's important to understand that like in a cultural context, when we say Hecate is the goddess of the crossroads, we don't like we mean that physical location, and we mean all the like magical potency, like just like in modern American culture, there's like a devil who lives at the crossroads, and you can make deals with him, like in that context. But also, she is the goddess of people who live and work at the crossroads, of homeless people, of refugees, of thieves, of sex workers. Like when you leave those offerings, you're leaving offerings for her, but like you're also putting out a meal for the people who live on the street.
Yeah.
Like she's the goddess. When we say she's the goddess of the streets, we also mean she's the goddess of street people.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
Sorry to be all like preachy like a nun.
No, not at all. Good. I was a bit of a street person myself for many years, and that's why we've got that connection. So your Orphic hymn grimoire, how did that come about? And
so it started, I grew up like, I didn't exactly grow up pagan. Like if you had asked me when I was a kid what religion we were Jewish. But in truth, for me, the most important parts of growing up Jewish were one, we like weren't Christian and everybody else around us was.
okay.
Like that was really like the most important part. Like the other few kids in my high school, like I also went to school with a couple of other Jews and a couple of other atheists and like a couple of Hindus and a couple of Buddhists. And we all understood ourselves to be like one thing and Christians to be like some other relatively oppressive force, you know what I mean? And then the second part of Judaism was that like the ancestral component, right? That I had this line of ancestry and this culture and this history like that was really full and active. And so my approach to being Greek was in many ways informed by the same way. So like when I read the Greek myths, I understood those to be the gods of my ancestors exactly the same way I understood the God of Israel to be the God of my mother's ancestors. Like the Greek gods were the gods of my fathers and the Jewish God was the God of my mother's, right? So I grew up with the Greek myths. And among those things were the Orphic hymns. So I really don't remember the first time I read the Orphic hymns. They were just like in our house as a kid, and like we didn't have a television for a while, so like I read a lot. There wasn't that much to do, right? So I read them. I don't really remember when. But as I learned more, every once in a while I'd be reading Taylor's translations, which are like the common translation that most people have.
Yeah.
And there would just be something in it that struck me, and I'd be like, I don't know, man. That doesn't seem like something a Greek person said in late antiquity. That seems like something a British neoclassicist would say. And so I started like just digging into the Greek to be like, and I'd be like, sometimes I'd be like, oh, Mr. Taylor, that is like not what that says.
Yeah, he just stuck it in because it rhymed.
Right, which I want to be clear, I love Taylor's translations. I think he is an amazing translator with a genuine connection to those gods. Like Taylor was called Taylor the Pagan pretty derisively by his colleagues. I heard a rumor that I could not substantiate that every time he finished a new like mythology translation, he sacrificed a goat in his backyard. Like he was the real deal. His writing is beautiful, but just like anything else, like they're 200 years out of date, more than 200 years out of date now, those translations. And so like the ways they understand society and whatnot are not just different from ancient Greece, they're also different from where I'm living and how I live. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the other translation available was that by Athanasakis, Apostolos Athanasakis, which is an excellent translation. It's very literal. Like Taylor's translation is not literal and not attempting to be, which I will say, like, I think that like a literal translation of sacred poetry like fully misses the point of what sacred poetry is. Like it's useful, but like I like those academic precise translations, but they're not very good for magic. Like they don't they're hard to get like the feel of. So I really like his translation. It's very literal. It has excellent footnotes. Like really, if you buy his book, like the footnotes which are like half or a third, 2/3 of that book are great. There's super useful information in there, right? But they also like they didn't work very well in magic. So I started just translating them on my own. For me, I think the first one I did was Selene, which I did at like I think my local pagan pride day. Like we used that translation. I did like a moon ritual. I don't even remember. It was quite a while ago. I started putting them on Facebook, and eventually people were like, "How do I give you money to do all of these?" And I was like, I don't know. But then I made a Kickstarter, which I didn't really expect to work, but it did. Now it turns out while I was doing that, Patrick Dunn at pretty much the same time was also working through his series of translations, but I didn't actually know him at that point. So like we were translating at the same time. I think truthfully that like when the muses want something done, they just tell like a lot of people to make sure it gets done. It's the same reason like, sometimes like two very similar movies come out at the same time. And like, how did that happen? Like it's just in the air. So I think it was in the air. Right. And he and I both wrote them. I think our translations are different, right? His, I think, are more literal, although they are not literal, and they're also more like delicate and poetic. The way I usually think of it is like his poems like tiptoe like beautiful little nymphs, and mine stomp, stomp, stomp like drunk snippers. So it's really just like a matter of preference. Right. Patrick's book also has excellent, useful footnotes. I will say this, in truth, if Patrick's translation had already started, like if it had come out 10 years earlier, I probably wouldn't have bothered to make my own. Like if I could have just used his, I probably would have.
Yeah.
Right. So that's sort of how I landed in it. But it was really just I started translating them for myself.
So I haven't actually seen the book myself. How many hymns have you done in there?
All 88 of them are in the book. So this is what the book looks like.
Yeah, I've seen the beautiful.
Yeah. Right. So the translations are really big, so you can read them by candlelight, because that's something I always found myself doing, is trying to read tiny little type. And they have some, but not all of the hymns have icons in them, original pictures.
Yeah, beautiful.
They're color in the hardback, and then they're black and white, like coloring book style in the paperback, so you can color them in yourself. And those are by my BFF / co-magician, Chase Brian Charles.
Do you think there was an element of like channeling when you were writing them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think in truth, when you read the book, you kind of see, or at least I could kind of feel which ones I have a stronger connection with. Like in truth, like anything else, I think, some of them are a little stronger than others. So I think you can kind of tell that like I have a real affinity for sort of like the Hermes, Hecate, Artemis, like mother of the gods, like type end. And then some of the more like civilized ones like Athena and Apollon, like not that I dislike them or anything, but I do think like they're not necessarily my strong suit, right? And I think that is like just a matter of my personal style. But the ones I felt more comfortable channeling are also the ones where I felt a little more comfortable being slightly less literal, because I felt like I really did kind of get what was being said, but everything's really heavily footnoted. So like when I go off script, like I tell you that I did that.
Yeah.
There were only 2 places where I just flat out like refused to translate what it said. The first one is in the hymn to sorry, my brain turned up. The hymn to Heracles, to Hercules, where it is said that it extols him for putting down the savage races. And like, no, I like refuse to put more of that in the world. So I just translated it as like you tame savagery, like the savagery of the heart. And the other one is in the hymn to Apollo, who in truth is like maybe not my strongest connection. I will say, of every hymn in here, I think Apollo is probably my worst work. Not that it's bad, but like I think it's partly that one has a lot of like sort of technical music jargon in it that I think if I understood like, late antiquity Greek music better would have been better, but I do not. And in that one, he is extolled for keeping the races separate. But I think actually in context, I actually think it means keeping the species separate, because it's in like the other things nearby it are more talking about like animal domestication. So I translated that one as preserving biodiversity.
Yeah, well, that's quite.
And those are the ones where I was just like, no, like I refuse to call that thing holy. I won't do it, and you can't make me. Yeah.
Well, I absolutely agree with that.
Right. I mean, I don't think they're controversial choices, and I also understand that, like, I don't know, it's hard for me to apply like modern ethics to, ancient days. So I'm not going to say like it was terrible then, but it seems to me like it was probably bad then too.
So what does your if you have a daily practice, I don't know if you probably do. What does that consist of?
So part of it is like I have practices I do most days, but I also don't, there's not like a clear distinction in my life about like when I'm doing witchy shit and when I'm just like doing everything else. Like it's kind of all like my daily practices are just like stuff I do. So like, I don't know, I feed blood meal to the apple trees. Is that a daily witchcraft practice? Well, I mean, it feels witchy when I do it, but like it's not, you know what I mean? I have a daily meditation practice, those sorts of things, right? But broadly, like I guess I feel like I do what I try very hard that my practice is like to do what is needful to do in that moment. You know what I mean? Like what the day calls for. And that sort of develops a rhythm, right? So like it tends to like what I do, and in many ways that rhythm is dictated by other people who have like more time constraints than I do. So like there's a co-magician I work with on Mondays. I didn't pick that because it's the day of the moon. I picked it because like that's the day he's free.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not like you get up at 8 a.m. and you've got this prescribed practice. Everything you do is kind of magical because you're magic.
Yeah, right. And I mean also I have that luxury, right? Like I really like I'm not like cosplaying a nun, right? Like I don't have those outside commitments anymore. Like I am free from them, but also like, I don't have a family that is taking up my time. And like I understand there are like benefits to having a family that I am also lacking. Do you know what I mean? And like I don't have a day job and that's cool, but I also being a nun is not especially a great way to make money. Like I make plenty, but there's a lot of things that like aren't taking up my time that I can fill with other things. But a lot of those things are not explicitly magic. They're things like gardening or cooking or mending clothes. Like in fact that is a non-trivial amount of what I do. I write every day. I meditate every day. I have a particular like Crocopeplos communion-ish meditation that I do every day. But broadly, I am less fond of like, oh, it's the new moon, I better do this magic, than like I just like have a my own kind of rhythms with my own world, some of which are dictated by the moon, some of which are dictated by my menstrual cycle, some of which are dictated by like financial cycles. Like there are also things I do at the beginning of a month, like a calendar month. And and all of those things sort of work together, all of those cycles in my life. I'm deeply seasonal, so the sort of work I'm doing like in the spring is in fact genuinely quite different than the work I'm doing in the fall almost always.
Yeah. And do you have like a patron goddess working with spirits?
So when I was like 11,
spirits.
When I was like 9, I guess, Ray Buckland told me I had to have one male god and one female god. So at that point, I dedicated myself to Hermes and Hecate. And that's been going great. Like I've acquired other gods since then, and I don't, I still have a deep connection with the God of Israel. Like that is still the God of my ancestors. I'm still Jewish. I still do Jewish holidays and etc. But yeah, I don't know. I dedicated myself to Hermes and Hecate, and that's been going great. So I've never felt the need to get rid of either one of those. And in many ways, those are still my primary patrons. Because of all the Orphic work I do a lot of like Dionysus work. I do a lot of work with Persephone and Eresh Kigal, who is in many ways, like to grossly oversimplify and culturally appropriate, she is broadly like a Mesopotamian goddess in the same category as like Persephone and Hecate. Like she is a queen of hell.
It's kind of linked with Inanna as well, isn't she?
Yeah, she and Inanna are usually understood to be sisters, and I often work with them not exactly at the same time, but like I understand there to be like a life and death circle, right? A cycle that like sort of like, Ishar's on the life end of and Ereshkigal's on the death end of, but that's actually one big thing. There's this goddess that they dug up in Çatalhöyük, which is this very early Neolithic site in Anatolia, and it's like fat Willendorf goddess in the front and a skeleton in the back.
Wow.
When I saw that, I was like, that's my goddess right there. I don't know her name, and like I think Ishtar Nana and Ereshkigal, like that's sort of that, and I think like the Persephone Aphrodite, like with Adonis type, like the kind of Persephone and Aphrodite that you see in the Adonis story, like that pairing of them, like that category is a category I find a lot of rich value in, particularly as I'm more rooted now. Like I own a home, I am slowly building an orchard. As I like work more in concert with the land, right? I move a little bit more towards, like those sort of gods, the really land-based gods, they were like hard to work with when I was, I mean, not homeless, but from when I was 18 and I moved out of my parents' house until I was in my late 30s, I never lived in the same place for more than 2 years.
Yeah.
Like I was always moving, and that made it hard to do that kind of land magic.
Were you
so
a city dweller?
Right. I was a city dweller, but not just a city dweller, like first one city and then another city, like not the same city all the time. Like I was a crossroads person, right? And so I really leaned very heavily on those sort of Hermes and Hecate crossroads style magic. And it's not that I don't do that anymore, but now I'm like learning how to do that deep rooting, which, I grew up deeply rooted in a place. The place I grew up is beautiful. It's among the most fertile non-irrigated land in North America. Wow. Like I grew up in a magical place.
Wow, yeah.
Right. And I now live in another magical place. Like I live very close to where the Monongahela and Allegheny rivers like combine to form the headwaters of the Ohio, which like I know you're not American, but the Ohio River Basin, like a third of the population of the United States lives in the Ohio River Basin. Like it feeds into the Mississippi. Like it's a big and important river. So like if you close your eyes and imagine like an American slave running, like fleeing across a river to freedom, the river that you are imagining is the Ohio River. It's the first place where Abraham Lincoln ever met an enslaved person. It's where the American, like also if you close your eyes and like imagine a crowd of people being baptized in a river, if you're imagining that in the United States, the river you are imagining is the Ohio. Like the American like revival movement, Christian revival movement also grew out of the Ohio River. Like it's a really powerful, magical, spiritual river.
That's nice. I've got a bit.
That's like, that's less than 5 miles from where I live.
Fantastic.
Is the headwaters of the Ohio.
A kind of philosophical question that just popped into my head because
sure.
I often wonder how magicians perceive spirits and gods. Do you think gods pre-existed humans? Or
I think there's a lot of different kinds of spirits that we call gods. The most important thing I have to say on this topic is I think it's important that like almost all the like category names that we use for gods, they're not like a species description, right? They're like a relationship description. So I think it is nonsense to ask a question like, is that spirit a god? You can ask, is that spirit my god? Right? I know that someone is my god because they're a spirit who will reliably reward my worship with blessing. That's a definition I stole from Ian Corrigan, right? So like even when I'm not talking about my god, I can talk about the god of something, right? Mm-hmm. So like Poseidon is the god of fishermen and lots of other things, right? Mm-hmm. Like Hashem is the god of Israel, right? You are god of a people or of a place. I think that the kinds of gods I love best are the kinds that arise from and abide in the land. But there are lots of other kinds, right? Some of them are celestial. So like the great god Venus, I really do think like, where does she come from? Like she has a body and that body is the planet Venus. Yeah. But she is also lots of other things. And I think almost always as modern people, the gods that we are working with are amalgamations of like dead human beings and animal, I don't know what we call them, like the spirit of an animal. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like the genius of that genus of animals, like the genius, the species spirit, right? Dead humans and places, right? And I feel like, especially for those of us who live on recently stolen land, like the land I live on is not the land where my ancestors lived, although it's not even the land where I grew up. Like I live quite a distance away from where I grew up, but geographic, like ecologically, where I live is very similar to where I grew up. I live in a temperate forest river valley, and I grew up in a temperate forest river valley, right? But the gods of my ancestors are like not the gods of the land I live on, and the gods of my ancestors are not the same as my other ancestors. Like there is a conflict between those things, and I think lots of people, especially for Americans, and especially for like, you know, I feel like I was really lucky. I grew up with not just one, but two intact cultures in a way that many Americans, particularly white Americans, grew up with none.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And I think we're all still learning what it means, right? But so like the gods of my land and the gods of my ancestors and like my personal gods, that's a wide variety of things. I think more so than for people who like continue to live in like broadly the same place that their great 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 grandparents did, and that like that
I do.
land, yeah, right, and like the language that you speak is not exactly the same language that like your umpteenth ancestors did, but there's sort of like a continuous historical transmission, right, of like Celtic languages and Gaelic languages and Brythonic languages and English, right? And like all of those are sort of accessible. But the people who lived where I live, like this exact piece of land where I am living 400 years ago, literally no one knows who they were. Like they were totally wiped out in the 100 years prior to European colonization of where I live, like probably by the Iroquois, who were like engaged in colonialism already,
Yeah.
right? But I really don't know. Like those people do not exist anymore. Like their culture is gone, and so like I do what I can to learn about it. But I feel like what they can't take from you, right? What they can't take from you as a person is like what you keep in your mind and what you keep in your heart. And what empire can't take from the land is the actual land. Like I don't know how the people who used to live here worked with Father Ohio, but I know who Father Ohio is. Like I can put my body in that river and know what it is to be in that river. And I know that like, you know, humans can pollute it and profane it, but it's still the same river it's been for hundreds of thousands of years, right? Yeah. That like the black walnut tree in my backyard, that tree is not the same, but that species is the same. And like, you know, that's a native plant where I live, a black walnut, which is similar but not identical to European or English, or like even I don't know what other people call them, like Eastern European, I guess like Transylvanian is a different kind of walnut tree. But they're all closely related, right? And like I can get to know that spirit by getting to know physical walnut trees, right? And like how they work. And so those are the ways I work with the spirits of the land, primarily because I can't really learn that from humans except in the ways that they can tell me about like history and ecology.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it's beautiful, actually.
But a battlefield, like where I live was a battlefield in the American Revolution. So there's also like a lot of complex, like I have a much more active, what I call landcestors, like dead people who lived and died where you live now. Mine are like particularly strange and active because I live on a battlefield, a relatively recent and large battlefield.
Yeah, from what
John Chapman, who became Johnny Appleseed, the day he laid down his weapon and was like, I am not going to fight in this war, and walked off to the west to become Johnny Appleseed, that happened, we don't know exactly where, but less than a mile away from where I live, which is one of the reasons I plant so many apple trees. I just recently got a Johnny Appleseed, like one of his cultivars, which are kind of hard to get these days. I just put one in.
So that's
last
one from his original kind of, wow.
One that he bred probably on his orchard, which was about 2 or 3 miles from where I live now. Like before he started wandering, he had an orchard that he actually returned to
200 years ago.
It was during what we call the Whiskey Rebellion, immediately after the American Revolution.
Yeah. Okay. More than 200 years then.
Like there was another revolution in America almost immediately after the American Revolution, which George Washington put down with an army at his back. Like George Washington rode into Pittsburgh and put down a rebellion with his army. And we don't always talk about that, but that's called the Whiskey Rebellion. And that's where I live, is like on where that was happening.
Never even heard of that.
Sorry, it's like so much. I understand much of what I'm saying is really not that interesting if you don't live in Pittsburgh, basically, or at least in Western Pennsylvania.
So spirits,
yes.
Evocation and kind of grimoire stuff. Do you do much of that?
I do. So, like I said, I came up like the first place I learned that was like the Solomonic Grimoires, primarily the Key of Solomon and Ars Goetia. I don't practice exactly like that, and honestly, I never practiced exactly like by the book. So, as a kid, I understood that like that was a Renaissance text that was probably based in like early medieval texts that was pretending to be an ancient Jewish text.
Yeah.
But I was not that comfortable with all that like Jesus whatnot. So I
Yeah.
just stripped it back to Judaism. Like I just took the Key of Solomon and did it how I thought King Solomon would have done it. And in truth, that's still how I do it now. But my appreciation of how King Solomon did it is much less informed by 1980s Reformed Judaism now, and much more informed by like a pretty solid historical understanding of Levantine antiquity, right? I really think it is a mistake historically to even try to decouple like the cultures of the ancient Eastern Mediterranean. So like the cultures of the Aegean and like Italian, pre-Roman Italian and Egyptian and like Canaanite. I think those are all mixed up in a way that like, you can't really segregate them out. Like they were all in constant contact with each other. And so like I think they all practice magic broadly the same ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, the very first piece of like real magic that like I read it and I was like, what the fuck? This is so much better than the spells I am making up based on fairy tales. Was a in my 7th grade history textbook, there was a translation which it doesn't tell you who translated it. I've never been able to find out, but I think like just now I do a lot of reading. I think it's just based on like the cadence of the poetry. I think it's Thorkild Jacobson translating one of the Mukal tablets. But it's a spell that starts off scorching fire, warlike son of heaven. And the instant I read that, I was like, fuck.
Yeah, that's
like this is real magic. Like I could feel it in the text right away. And that's really what lit the fuse for me. I was like, I want more of that. And I went to the library and just started digging. And I honestly, I feel like, especially for growing up Bible country, I had very good luck with librarians. Like they were extremely helpful to young me, like basically smuggling me books out of the adult section. Then like my parents were chill with me reading, but you know, the library board was not.
Yeah. I was going to ask how your family viewed your
I mean,
veganism.
honestly, I think in the beginning they viewed it as like silly and I would probably grow out of it. But you know, there was no like we weren't that religious at all, and what religion we were was Jewish, and like Judaism has never really had a problem with magic. Like that's not a forbidden activity. It's like kind of frowned on for women and it's frowned on for children. Like you're not really supposed to do that as a little kid, and it turns out there were good reasons for that. Like I regret learning like there are certain Kabbalistic experiments I did as like a 17-year-old girl that like it turns out they were right. I should have waited until I was a grown up who knew what I was doing. But like whatever, I don't exactly I say I regret doing them. That's not true. I don't regret it, but like I understand why they recommended against it because I did blow my life up by doing it.
Yeah.
But it all worked out.
I think a lot of magic does tend to it's like the lightning struck tower. It'll blow everything up. But
yeah, and you know what? I'm glad I blew my life up at 18 instead of at like 35 when it would have been much harder to put back together.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I don't know, adolescence was also blowing my life up. So
yeah, make your mistakes early might be a
yeah, right. And I had good parents. You know what I mean? Like when things went bad, I could trust my parents to like be there for me and like take care of me, both in a like literal sense, but also in like an emotional metaphor. Like I never questioned my parents' love for me. I just didn't. Like I knew they were there for me. I knew I could be safe there. Like, and I understand that a lot of people like don't have that, and that makes me sad and angry.
Many people.
Yeah, honestly, I think having been a teacher, I'm coming around to the idea that most people have what I consider to be pretty shitty parents.
Yeah, I think that's why I invited you to come on the show is you have this kind of very balanced energy, you know.
Well, I mean, you know, there's also the messy parts I try to keep off Facebook, you know.
Yeah,
like, I'm still a person.
I'm not so good at keeping my messy parts off. So that just about covers it, really.
Awesome.
Anything you'd like to? Are you writing anything at the moment?
So I actually just turned in like the finalized copy edited manuscript of my incense book. It's called The Big Book of Magical Incense,
I've got
and it
a preview
just
of that.
yeah, so it's going to be out from Wiser December 1st, and it's actually available for pre-order now. So you can pre-order it from like Amazon or wherever, but personally, I think it's better if you call your local like witch bookstore and ask them to order it for you. It's better for the community in the sense you support that bookstore, and also Amazon is the literal worst. Like I'd prefer you not give them money on my behalf, but you can also order it there.
Taking over the world, and it's scary.
Yeah, like I feel like the extra $2 it's going to cost you at a local bookstore, like good, fine. Give them the extra $2. You know what I mean? Well worth it for there to be like a physical location in our community.
Yeah, I'll sneak in one last question because I think we're over the hour. Incense. Why is it so important in magic? Because it's absolutely fundamental.
So I think the core reasons like incense are valuable is one, like I don't want to like I really cannot overstress the fact that incense, like almost all magical incenses, they're drugs. They have chemical effects in your brain that like you cannot substitute for. But I also think like a lot of the value of incense is that it's value dense. Like it's a small like physical volume of it is a lot of money. So it was like a luxury trade good from far away.
Yeah.
I think that like also, you know, particularly when you're doing group ritual, like if you can imagine like if they burned a lot of incense in like the center of maybe not a giant stone circle like Avery, but a smaller one like say Stonehenge, you could see that plume of incense from like the entire region in a way. Like I think it's hard for us to remember that incense, it wasn't, you know, historically like these religious practices like or what we would call magico religious, I guess, like they weren't a thing you were doing in your living room. They were a thing like your entire like town, your entire village was doing, right? And like you need to be able to see it from the cheap seats. And I think incense, you know, it goes up. It goes up and you can see that plume from far away. You can smell it from far away. Like I think that's actually like part of it. But also I cannot overstress the like chemistry aspect of incense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very important thing that a lot of most incenses are psychoactive to a greater.
Yeah, which is why like I don't really encourage people to use synthetic incenses in magic because the synthetic ones like are not the same. Like they just have the smell component. They don't have a lot of the like biologically active components in them.
Yeah. Oh, well, I wish we had more time.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
You'll come back on because I've got about 100 questions that I just thought.
Will do. Well, here's a secret that I haven't told anybody yet. Probably starting July 1st, I'm going to have a class on the Solomonic Pentacles. So you can have me back to talk about that if you want.
Please, yes. And I've got a scoop on that one. So thank you very much, Sarah. It's been lovely meeting you. You're a lovely lady.
It was lovely to talk to you as well.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. See you soon. It's just going to cut off, by the way. So, you know. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.